best outcome would be for CRS to actually be Catholic and to propagate the faith.
Catholic Relief Services signed on to the idea that condoms are 98% effective.
If you're feeding bellies and giving them the poison of masturbation and contraception and condoms.
Oh, I think they have multiple reasons to want to destroy the African culture, which is very pro-life and very pro-family and recognizes the fundamental distinction between men and women.
Well, now you're murdering their bodies and their souls.
Yeah.
And you're doing it in the service of charity.
I mean, we put a lot of time and effort to make sure that these reports are as objective and accurate as possible.
The best outcome would be for CRS to be completely extricated from government funding, from these private foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates, Soros Fund, any entity that has as their goal the spread of contraception. Don't partner with them.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
We are here today to release the results of a year-long field investigation of Catholic Relief Services projects in 3 African countries. These countries are Cameroon, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho. And yes, I said year-long investigation, and it was an investigation that involved sending investigators to do on-the-ground research in these 3 countries of CRS projects. We do not take the questions that we are about to ask lightly, nor should we. These are questions that involve the health not just of bodies, but of souls. I'm talking about the souls of girls and young women aged from 10 to 24 years of age, who are the targets of certain USAID, PEPFAR-funded projects in Africa. That's USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, and PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Reduction. CRS has participated in these projects in various questionable ways.
And Catholic Relief Services, according to your partnered report today, seems to be complicit in a variety of immorality, abortion, contraception, homosexuality, transgenderism. But the one that really piqued my curiosity, I hate to say it this way, was masturbation. And the reason why I think that is, and I would love to get your take on this, is you claim you want to stop the spread of AIDS. Okay, that's a good thing to want. Mm-hmm. Why teach masturbation? That doesn't seem to make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, except if you are in the business of encouraging young people to engage in any and all sexual activity. You know, pleasuring yourself, for example, masturbation, has nothing to do with stopping the spread of AIDS, but then condom promotion really doesn't either. Because you see, the Catholic Relief Services signed on to the idea that condoms are 98% effective. Well, that means that 2% of the time they fail. Now, if you're telling a couple, one of whom is HIV positive, that they're free to use condoms for the rest of their life, there are going to be multiple instances of failure over the course of a year's period of time. So instead of 98% success rate in preventing the spread of AIDS, each time you use it, you increase the probability that you get AIDS. So at the end of the day, you wind up in the same place as you would if you didn't use a condom at all. And that place is you have AIDS, you're HIV/AIDS positive, because condoms do fail. We know that in the case of condom use and among couples, perfect condom use results in 15% of the couples being pregnant at the end of the year. That's perfect use.
Wow.
And obviously, much use is imperfect. So encouraging masturbation, mutual masturbation, condom use, all of these things falls very, very short of what the Catholic Church teaches, which is to say that we are to be chaste before marriage and chaste within marriage. And that is the only fail-safe protection against HIV/AIDS in Africa or any other sexually transmitted disease.
The research that we're talking about began actually in 2019, and it led to a series of reports that was published by the Lepanto Institute in 2020, showing that Catholic Relief Services had published a series of documents promoting condom use, ran an internet library that housed documents promoting abortion and contraception, created a health referral network in Cameroon and also in Nigeria that sent girls to abortion-minded contraception providers, and led the implementation of a PEPFAR initiative designed to increase the use of contraception called DREAMS. These reports went largely unnoticed in 2020 due to a series of chaotic events all over the world. So after discussing these reports with Steve Mosher and his team, we decided that what we found was serious enough that we had to send researchers to some of these project sites to find out what was really going on. So we sent a team of researchers to Cameroon, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho to look into CRS projects there. In Cameroon, we looked at the KIDS project, KIDSS. In Zimbabwe, our investigative team looked into CRS's project called Pathways, which was responsible for the implementation of DREAMS. And in Lesotho, our investigators examined CRS's implementation of the DREAMS project there as well, and its involvement with another project called Karabo Ea Befolo.
In your report, you detail how Catholic Relief Services chose these partners. They had options.
Sure.
So one of the things that I think that they would push back on, they're like, Michael, golly gee whiz, these are the only options, Michael. There's no other options, just these groups. These groups are the only ones operating in Africa who will help us get the funding. We need to do our part, and we're not responsible for their part. There's no other options. Michael, what's your problem?
The problem is that you can't be morally complicit in somebody else's sin and not be sinning yourself. So if an organization is out there distributing contraception and you're partnered with that organization, knowing fully well that they're distributing contraception, and part of the project maybe includes that, maybe it doesn't. But if you're introducing vulnerable people to that particular organization, well, you're introducing them to the whole organization, not just that integral project. So no. Even if they're the only ones who can have the mosquito nets or drill the wells or whatever the case is, you don't partner with them. You find another way. You have the resources, you have the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to drill these wells, to get mosquito nets and anti-malaria drugs to vulnerable people without being entangled with these other groups. So it's not true, except that they won't get the federal funding that they want unless they partner with these groups, and that's the caveat.
Yeah, so what are they doing with the extra money they're making off the federal government?
That's a good question, and I wish I had the answer.
And one of the projects, the one I'll be covering, is called DREAMS, which means determined, resilient, empowered, AIDS-free, mentored, and safe. This was created by PEPFAR in 2014 and primarily funded by USAID. We found CRS activities involving DREAMS, where they ran projects for DREAMS in several countries, including Uganda, Kenya, and Lesotho, and had found that DREAMS has the provision of condoms, contraception, and graphic sexual education as a primary and essential component for every girl that is enrolled in the program. We also saw at the time that CRS was implementing a DREAMS project in Zimbabwe. However, we did not have sufficient evidence to write a report in 2020. So when we were discussing areas that we wanted to send these investigators that we worked with, we figured that Zimbabwe would be a great place to look. So this is the result of our investigation in Zimbabwe. And this on-the-ground investigation gives us a full picture of the operation of the DREAMS project in Zimbabwe and of the key role that CRS played in its implementation through the USAID-funded program called Pathways.
One of the things about Lepanto Institute reports is they are chock full of the receipts.
Yes.
Like it's mind-boggling, like when someone says, oh, we're not at all involved in that, and then there's like pictures and like screenshots of reports and their materials, and you're just like, how do you come to this conclusion based on the evidence we're seeing? And yet, even though you're showing the receipts and you gave a great presentation on what's going on in parts of Africa with CRS, I find that too many people, well-meaning, well-intentioned Catholics even, simply ignore the evidence. They don't even want to look at it. They don't want to read it. How does that make you feel as one of the people behind the research here?
It's pretty disappointing, to be honest. I mean, we put a lot of time and effort to make sure that these reports are as objective and accurate as possible. I mean, we've seen bad reporting in the past, and we know that, sometimes something will come out and it's just not precise, not accurate. Yeah. We pride ourselves on making sure that we examine only primary source materials, the actual websites of say, CRS in this instance, the documents that they put out through the government. We comb through hundreds of pages to put these things together, and then what happens is that CRS, they don't like this, so they'll just put out a blanket statement saying, there's nothing to see here. This is all fine. This is just inaccurate reporting, or this is something that's already come out. When it's new reporting, this is new information, and certain Catholic media just will not report on it. And so I guess that would lead people to believe that there's really nothing to see. But the good Lord provides, and He will show this to people.
Amen.
Our investigation and analysis was guided from the beginning, primarily by two papal documents, Caritate in Veritatis and Pope Benedict's 2012 Motu Proprio on the service of charity. The questions we ask about the CRS projects in Cameroon and Lesotho and Zimbabwe followed Pope Benedict's very clear direction in his Motu Proprio. These questions were: do these charitable projects in Africa follow Catholic principles, or did they involve commitments which negatively affect the observance of those same principles? Now here we're looking primarily at Catholic moral theology governing human sexuality. Another question: were local diocesan bishops in Africa allowed to exercise their legitimate authority over the, quote, activities and management of these projects to ensure that the norms of the Church's universal and particular law were respected, end of quote? Another serious question. Were the intentions of the American faithful, who make donations and bequests in the understanding that these funds will only be used in accordance with Church teaching, being respected in these African projects? And another question directly from the Motu Proprio: did CRS take care to ensure that it selects its personnel from among persons who share, or at least respect, the Catholic identity of these works? Another question: did CRS take care to ensure that the African faithful, and here we're talking about young girls, are not led into error? Finally, two questions. Did CRS receive financial support from institutions, in this case USAID and PEPFAR, that pursue ends contrary to Church's teaching? Related to this is the second. Did CRS receive funding for the implementation of initiatives, even in part, whose ends are not in conformity with the Church's teaching? Again, questions directly from Pope Benedict's instruction. The answer to this last double question is quite obviously yes, and yes on both counts.
So am I just reading too much into, I can't help myself but to say that there's a nefarious motive here. Because again, if you purport to say you want to stop the spread of AIDS, but you're then doing all these other activities, which you just clearly described, then I have to believe that they are trying to destroy this culture. Why would they want to do that?
Oh, I think they have multiple reasons to want to destroy the African culture, which is very pro-life and very pro-family and recognizes the fundamental distinction between men and women. And those reasons include the desire of Western countries to export their own lifestyle, which we should call a death style, to relatively innocent and untouched corners of the world. It relies on the idea that we would be better off if the planet had fewer people rather than more people. These are all efforts to drive down the birth rate. It's clear that however well-intentioned the original plan to help people with AIDS in Africa was, it has gradually been transformed into just another USAID population control program. So they're going out and recruiting young girls into these projects to teach them not just how to use male and female condoms, which is bad enough. They're putting them on abortifacient contraceptives, long-acting contraceptive drugs, powerful steroid-based hormones with serious side effects, including IUDs, which cause early term abortions, including Implanon, which is a contraceptive implant in the arm under the skin, which chemically sterilizes you for 2 years, and Depo-Provera, which is the injectable contraceptive, which sterilizes you for 3 months at a time. And they're doing these things to girls who may not be sexually active at all, or even if they are, they're doing it not to stop the spread of AIDS, because an IUD, Implanon, or a Depo-Provera doesn't stop the spread of AIDS. What it does is it prevents you from getting pregnant. And so the goal of these programs is to drive down the pregnancy rate and reduce population growth. Population control has been at the heart of USAID programs since the 1960s. Virtually every program of USAID now in the world has a population control component. You want to talk about feeding refugees in a refugee camp and building tents for them? Well, you've got to send in the contraceptives in the aid package that you hand out to each one of these refugees. They all get condoms, they all get birth control pills. And you would think that in the case of refugees, where some of them have lost children to war or famine or disease, they might want to have a child. And what does USAID say? They're refugees. They're not allowed to have children.
Wow.
That's a direct quote from one of the refugee programs that we got some years ago in Bosnia-Herzegovina. They're refugees. They can't have children.
Our initial research from CRS-produced documents indicated that KIDS was involved in sexual and reproductive health programs for adolescent girls and young women. And before long, we discovered that the SRH component was a part of a health referral scheme created by CRS for the project. And what we discovered about the referral scheme was that CRS's handpicked several contraception-providing organizations to send girls for sexual and reproductive health services, one of which was notorious and publicly advocating for the decriminalization of abortion. So the first thing that I want to show you, that our researchers got a copy of this manual. It's called What Do You Want to Be When You Grow? Okay, so you can see it right here. The acknowledgments page of the manual was developed for the Kids in Cameroon project, and indicates the support of Dr. Leslie Chingang, who was CRS's deputy chief of party in Cameroon from 2014 to March of 2023. It also acknowledges the Kids team in the editing, review, and compilation of the manual. And 2 other individuals are specifically thanked for, quote, recommending use of this manual to Catholic Relief Services. And one thing that you'll notice is right here at the top is CRS's logo.
You detailed quite a bit, extensive evidence in your document about, the materials that they're passing up, the pamphlets that you've obtained copies from, the documents off their website, their logos being used in a lot of this stuff, and even a couple of pictures that I remember from the report as well. What about audio and video evidence? Do you have any audio catching them red-handed in the midst of these programs?
Our investigators went into these African areas, CRS offices, their partner offices. They met in the field. They met in office buildings, whatever. Mm-hmm. And they went in with audio equipment. They went in with camera equipment.
And you have that?
We do.
And what are you going to do with it?
Wait.
Is it in a secret vault so that to be triggered to the press in case you get suicidal all of a sudden?
Yeah, when CRS comes around and says, we talked to our people on the ground and they never said that. Okay, let's play that game. Let's play that game. CRS, I'm talking to you, CRS. Go ahead and say that and see what happens.
Is there any hope that based on your report, that we will see a big push from U.S. bishops in particular to either put pressure on CRS to stop their activities or to defund them altogether?
There's always hope.
You're the glass half full guy, I could tell.
I'm the glass.
But I'm a pessimist by trade, so What's the bottom line? What do you think, percentage-wise, ballpark it? What do you think the amount of bishops in the U.S. are going to pay attention to this?
So you used the glass half full analogy. I look at it from a more practical standpoint. Were you filling the glass or were you pouring it out? And if we look at the trend, and I were to prognosticate what kind of response we'd get, I think we'd get a handful of bishops who might complain behind closed doors, and then the bigger bishops who have hands involved in what's going on in Rome would be the ones to squash them down. And there would be some sort of shuffling of the deck at CRS, and they would say, oh, we had a meeting and we discussed this, and we're going to make sure that everything has a firm Catholic identity and there's not a problem anymore. Please give us money.
Hey, we took care of that. What's next? World peace?
A chart on page 50 specifically rules out abstinence-only education. So if you're part of the DREAMS program, you may not teach abstinence-only education. You must teach, if you teach abstinence, you have to teach it in conjunction with condom usage, which means CRS can't even fall back on that as a defense for its involvement in the project. One of the things our team on the ground in Zimbabwe discovered was the way the service package is layered in the DREAMS project. Now what this layering means, what this means is that every girl enrolled by CRS for one part of DREAMS was necessarily referred to each and every one of the remaining core services, including those which specifically promoted and provided contraception and graphic sexual education. Even if CRS never distributed a single condom itself, as a prime implementing partner for DREAMS, CRS was not just a participant, but a leader in a project designed to spread condoms, contraception, and graphic sexual education, and would, by necessity, due to the project's own rules, be referring any vulnerable girls they enrolled to other groups for condom and contraception education and provision. Now, did this happen in practice, or is this just on paper? That's why we sent a team to find out. Because a lot of times when you're just researching these things and looking through project documents, this may not be the reality that happened on the ground, but may just be somehow reported. We've had CRS say this before, that things were just reported that didn't happen. So we had a team and they checked it out. So did this happen in practice? Yes. Our investigators met with CRS Zimbabwe's Deputy Chief of Party. His name is Richard Savo. In the course of this interview, Mr. Savo confirmed to our investigators that DREAMS included sexual and reproductive health as part of its core package of interventions, and that CRS was required to refer girls to other implementing partners to receive these services.
You shared some pretty disturbing things that was going on with CRS, the DREAMS program, and other programs. What was the most disturbing thing as a Catholic, as a husband, as a father? What was like the most grotesque, oh my heavens, I can't even fathom how any Catholic could be involved in this?
Well, I think to me, watching the Facebook presentation that CRS itself put together when they were closing out their Pathways project, and seeing that the young woman come up and who had been in the DREAMS program, and imagining, okay, that could be one of my daughters coming up, and she came from difficult circumstances, from abuse, but then was further abused by this program and was taught about contraception and condoms, putting her soul in danger.
Yeah.
That is disturbing to me, thinking, okay, that could be any one of our daughters. You know, in a time of vulnerability, and this is a program for vulnerable young women, to be taught this sort of stuff by a Catholic institution. That is disturbing to me.
Yeah, it surely is. Some of the material that the sign language, you didn't even want to show it.
Right.
It's that disturbing. I mean,
Yes.
frankly, some of the displays that you did show were pretty disturbing.
And we censored
Even
a lot
you
of
censored those. It was still very hard to get through. So I imagine that when it comes to really difficult topics like this one, most Catholics don't want those images in their mind. They don't want these thoughts in their minds, so they're going to not review this material. What could we do? How do we change that? How do you, and maybe you can offer some advice on how would a Catholic begin to approach this without maybe scandalizing their own thoughts, their own mind?
That's an important question. I would say start with the executive summary of the report. We'll start with those facts first. We've sanitized it as best we can, and this is not a report for children. My own children at home could not watch the press conference today because of some of the material involved.
Yeah.
We know that, I mean, it can be damaging to just look through all this stuff yourself. We've done our best to censor things as best we can, but if you're of a more sensitive mindset, stick with just the reporting on it and with the executive summary. You can get the facts there, and also the conclusions, and then maybe avoid some of the material in the middle if you're of a sensitive mindset. And I can totally understand this is not for everyone.
Yeah.
But heads of families should know what's going on. And those of you who are giving money to the church should know where your money is going.
Yeah.
So I would say start with the executive summary.
Okay, how long is the final report?
The final report is 120 pages.
120 pages,
Yes.
and you have all those examples in that report.
That's correct.
And that can be emailed, that can be shared?
Yes, it can. We have the PDF copy on our website, and that is easily attached to any email.
So PEPFAR is now a population control program, and the goals of these programs are defined in terms that mean we are trying to drive down the number of babies born to African women. When you hear the phrase vulnerable girls, you shouldn't think of that we're just talking about girls who are sexually active or who are prostitutes. The vulnerable population is defined in these programs as the poor. Well, in Zimbabwe, Cameroon, and Lesotho, most of the people are poor. So if you say poverty is an indication of vulnerability, you've included the entire population of these programs. These programs are targeted at the entire population, not just those susceptible to AIDS. And when we talk about referrals, you have to keep in mind that we're talking about girls as young as 10 who are not sexually active and who are being encouraged by these programs to become so. Finally, you may have noted that some of the projects we described ended in 2022 or 2023. You must know that these projects almost always continue, sometimes under the same name, but often under a different name, with a new project grant, but the same description and the same people are involved. So all of the things we're describing are contemporary. They are happening right now. So when you think about what it means for CRS to have implemented a sex education program that promoted masturbation as a form of safer sex, think about those girls. And when you think about CRS providing hundreds of thousands of dollars to an organization taking girls for abortions and lobbying for pro-abortion laws, think about those African girls. When you think about being the lead implementer of government programs specifically designed for the spread of contraception, think of the girls being recruited into these programs by CRS and then deliberately referred into the hands of people who, on the guise of protecting their health, destroy their souls.
So the local clergy then, surely the Catholic hierarchy in Africa who just rejected fiducia supplicans, the local priests, surely they know what's going on and they reject this wholeheartedly, don't they?
That's why the local bishop and the local priests are not generally directly involved in these programs. According to the teaching of the Catholic Church that was laid out by Pope Benedict in his motu proprio on the service of charity, the local bishop on the ground in Africa should be not just approving of these projects, he should be in charge of these projects. That any Catholic Relief Services project should go through the local bishop, be approved by him, be supervised by him. That doesn't happen now. They don't consult with the local bishop for a good reason, because most of the African bishops would say, if they learned about the truth about these programs, most of them would say, we don't want this in our diocese. In fact, we had an archbishop some years ago in Madagascar, the archbishop of the capital city of the country of Madagascar, which is an island off the east coast of Africa, poor country, like much of sub-Saharan Africa, say to us, we would rather that Catholic Relief Services leave us alone in our poverty than come in in this way.
Wow. That's pretty heartbreaking, actually.
It's heartbreaking because what is he in the business of? He's in the business of saving souls. He's in the business of getting kids taught the Catholic faith, taught the road to holiness, taught the highway to heaven, and get them home to heaven. That's his job. And if he wants to do that, he can't collaborate with an organization that is encouraging them to engage in objectively immoral acts.
So what about the Vatican and all of this? Surely prelates, surely hierarchy, surely the clergy who has seen what's going on, seen the receipts, seen the evidence, surely they're reporting this back to the Home Office in Rome. Someone over there's got to be concerned about this and put a stop to all of this, no?
We thought we had embarked on a situation 12 years ago when Cardinal Sarah, who was then the head of Cor Unum, in charge of the charitable works of the Catholic Church in the Vatican, Cardinal Sarah, the great cardinal from Ghana, African country, said very clearly that the sorts of things that Catholic Relief Services was doing were not permitted and that fundamental reform should be undertaken. He actually spoke at a convention of the entire African Bishops' Conference, at which he and other African bishops spoke against the kind of charitable programs that were being carried out by relief services, not just from the United States, but from other countries like Germany and the Netherlands and so forth, supposedly under the Catholic banner, but in fact on the ground violating the teachings of the Catholic Church. And they were all opposed to it. And they thought that Pope Benedict's encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, would put an end to this, especially because it was followed by a very strong and very explicit motu proprio, which stated specifically what the sorts of things that Catholic agencies should not be allowed to do and what they should have to do. Consult with the local bishops, not do anything that compromised the morals of the people that they were trying to reach with their charitable aid programs, not to collaborate with any organizations that promoted things like contraception, sterilization, and abortion, not to accept funding from any organizations that promoted things that violated the teaching of the Church. It couldn't be clearer. It couldn't be clearer that CRS ignored that, actually pretended to be in compliance with it. As soon as it came out, they immediately sent out a press release saying, we're totally in compliance with this motu proprio. In fact, they weren't at almost every level in compliance, but they denied it. And they never made any fundamental changes in the organization. But back to what happened in 2011 and 2012. We thought that we had undertaken a process that would lead to the reform of Catholic Relief Services, and that reform died a borning.
Wow.
In the field, Caritas Lesotho told our research team that as an implementing partner of the Four Children's Project and acting under CRS's direction, Caritas Lesotho participated in, quote, community service days with Dreams partner PSI, while participating in handing out condoms. As a side note, Population Services International was created by an international pornographer for the specific purpose of spreading contraception as a form of population reduction among the African population. As you'll see in this report, we have several other verified references, such as a peer-reviewed article, all confirming CRS's pivotal role in coordinating the implementing partners in these community service prevention days, or provision days. In August of 2022, KB published on its own website the involvement of condom promotion and distribution during a community service day, saying that its partners made services accessible, such as, quote, unwanted pregnancies prevention for AGYW, which is adolescent girls and young women. And also said, KB also ensure availability and accessibility of both male and female condoms, including condom messaging. KB published pictures from several community service days showing condom demonstrations on a wooden phallus, like this one. Okay, you can see the demonstration. There's the demonstration right there. And the expression on the men, I think, says it all.
Yeah, so what are they doing with the extra money they're making off the federal government?
That's a good question, and I wish I had the answer.
Doesn't it make you wonder?
It does.
Like, surely, I mean, in the press conference, $1 billion, Steven Mosher mentioned $1 billion. Does it take $1 billion to pass out condoms? Does it take $1 billion to hand out pornography material that teaches Africans how to masturbate and how to use condoms? Does it take $1 billion to have AIDS clinics or whatever? I don't think it does.
Well, let me give you an insight into the bureaucracy at Catholic Relief Services. The CEO of Catholic Relief Services pulls in over $500,000 a year in salary and benefits. The top 8 paid employees account for roughly 1/3 of the overall sum that they pull in from the Rice Bowl campaign. 8 people account for almost $3 million.
Wow. I'm in the wrong business.
Yeah, well, exactly. And as Father McTeague had said before, usually these people start off doing good and then end up doing well.
What would you like to see happen to the Catholic Relief Services? What would be the best outcome here?
The best outcome would be for CRS to actually be Catholic and to propagate the faith. And let's take the model of our Lord, for instance. With the Beatitudes, he went on the Mount. He saw that the people were hungry. He turned to his apostles and he said, they're hungry. And the apostles said, we only have a couple of loaves of bread and some fish. What do you want us to do about it? And our Lord said, put them in a basket and start distributing them. They wound up having plenty of food. I'm not saying that CRS has to multiply loaves and fishes, but CRS, in feeding their bellies, has their attention. And with their attention, can stand on the mount and preach the Gospels and draw souls to Christ. Because if you're feeding bellies without feeding their souls as well, then all you're doing is starving them and sending them on their way. You're starving them spiritually. Even worse, if you're feeding bellies and giving them the poison of masturbation and contraception and condoms, well, now you're murdering their bodies and their souls.
Yeah.
And you're doing it in the service of charity. So this is the big problem. The best outcome would be for CRS to be completely extricated from government funding, from these private foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates, the Soros Fund, the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah.
Get rid of any entity that has as their goal the spread of contraception. Don't partner with them. Partner with others. If you can't take their money because they're spreading contraception, as Pope Benedict's motu proprio demands, well, so be it. The faith has been propagated all over the world on less.
Is it possible for them to do that now? Do you think the ship has sailed? There's no turning back now? I mean, can they clean house and can they cut off the government funding and just go with the donations they have and do the best they can and call it done? But at least they'd be moral. Is that even possible now, or is it too late for all that?
Well, they're addicted to federal funding. That's a given. But I think that they can absolutely cut back. You know, if the federal grants were to dry up, what would they do? Let's say tomorrow the federal government said, you're a Catholic organization, we're not going to fund you anymore. What would they do?
Yeah.
They would be forced to operate without that federal funding. And they would make do. They would say, okay, we're going to have to cut all of these different areas, but we're going to tighten up and we're going to continue doing charitable works. Oh, and by the way, now that you're not taking federal funds, you can preach the Gospels. So I think that would be a great thing. I think it would be fantastic. And it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
Our investigators also visited the offices of J.P. Kapnick Trust, an organization whose mission is to serve people with special needs or who are living with a disability. But J.P. Kapnick also carries out campaigns that provide and promote condoms and contraception for individuals living with disabilities. And I should have here this is something that we obtained by our investigators from J.P. Kapnick's office, which is a sign language book for sexual reproductive health for young people. It purports to be intended to protect youth by giving them the signs needed to describe something that's happened to them, and that makes sense. However, this goes well beyond that and gives graphic signs for perverse activities, and it also explicitly promotes condom usage and transgenderism. So, so you can see slides from this in the full report. I'd rather not show some of this where there may be children watching this stream.
On page 2, CRS provided another chart showing source material for its HIV curriculum and sex education course modules. One of the sources is a curriculum called Go Girls. And on page 3 of this CRS document, it actually has a hyperlink to the Go Girls curriculum published by Johns Hopkins University. Not only does this curriculum heavily promote contraception, but it actually includes a pornographic step-by-step instruction on how to use a condom. And once again, I had to edit the images. You can see here, okay? It's a step-by-step, and it actually includes the sex act in this area here, which again I censored because it was extremely graphic.
You mentioned Cardinal Dolan making a phone call once. How did that go? And if Cardinal Dolan's advice doesn't get listened to, spoiler alert, then is it too late? Is the ship sailed and there's no turning back?
Well, Cardinal Dolan was then the head of Catholic Relief Services. He was the chairman. And we had sent him our report on Madagascar. And we're talking about a 100-page report, the result of a couple of months on the ground of an investigator talking to people at all levels, from the Archbishop down to the local workers, who wore the CRS logo on their T-shirt as they were handing out condoms. So we had them dead to rights on this particular program, which was called Sante 2Net. And we sent the information to Cardinal Dolan, and he called the Archbishop of the capital city and talked to him about this. And the Archbishop of the capital city had said that, that CRS, he had said to us, CRS really doesn't consult with us about their projects. They once came into my office and wanted to put up a CRS banner in my office. And he said, exact quote, I told them to get the hell out of my office.
Wow.
He said it would be better for them to leave us alone in our poverty than to come in and do what they do. Well, Cardinal Dolan called him, and we don't know the substance of that conversation because it was never released. But what CRS said was Cardinal Dolan called the Archbishop, and the Archbishop had no complaints to make. Well, we don't know if the Archbishop had any complaints to make or not because there wasn't transparency. We don't have a transcript of the call. But basically, CRS framed it as they got a pass from the Archbishop of the capital city when Cardinal Dolan called. Now, they did, when Cardinal Dolan stepped down, they brought in what I initially thought was an outsider. Dr. Carolyn Wu had been the dean of the business school at Notre Dame University. But when I looked into her history, I realized she had served on the board of directors of CRS for almost a decade.
Oh, wow.
So she wasn't an outsider at all. She was an insider who was brought in and, as events proved, continued the same things that had been going on before. So
Okay,
the situation now is they do a clever carve-out. There's a huge project funded by USAID PEPFAR, $10 million, $50 million, somewhere in between. CRS will carve out a portion that it says does not violate the teaching of the Catholic Church in sexual morality or anywhere else. The problem is, if it's one of the implementers of that program, it has to not only recruit girls into the program, it has to do referrals to the other organizations that do the abortion, sterilization, contraceptive aspects. So you're intimately involved in the whole process of recruiting the girls and sending them off to be, have the IUDs inserted or have the Depo-Provera shot given. That's bad enough. And if they're the prime implementer, then their complicity is even deeper, because if they're the prime implementer, they have to recruit the other partners, and they recruit these organizations that do the contraception, sterilization, abortion promoting. And they also have to account for the funding, because as the prime implementer, the funding comes to them.
Wow.
And then they have to divvy it out to these other groups. So their hands are not clean.
Clearly.
Their hands are not clean.
You mentioned in the press release $1 billion. Catholic Relief Services has received $1 billion.
According to the 2022 financial statements, the Catholic Relief Services, if I recall the numbers correctly, received $328 million from the laity, from Catholics, most in the annual collection, some from large gifts, and over $1 billion from the federal government. $1 billion and 17 million or something,
Yeah.
$1 billion and change.
Billion and change.
So three times.
Does it take $1 billion to implement the programs that you have detailed in your report? And if it doesn't take $1 billion to do that, what do they do with the balance?
So this is typical of foreign aid, only about a third actually goes into the project itself. So 2/3 of every dollar is wasted. You can do, if you don't have to set up that bureaucracy, if you don't have to abide by the reporting requirements of the federal government because you didn't take their money, if you don't have to worry about maybe putting up a crucifix where they come in and say you're violating church and state, and you don't have to worry about being pressured to promote condom acceptance and accept contraceptives at the cost of perhaps losing your grant. If you don't have to worry about those things, you can do a lot with very little. Think about it. A few decades ago, a poor little nun, barely 5 feet tall, with a few pennies in her purse, went into the slums in Calcutta, in India, right? That's Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Look at what look at what came from that little seed of faith that she planted. She didn't have $1 billion from USAID. If she had, they would have compromised her from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So
is it too late then? Going back to another question. So Catholic Relief Services, is it too late to reform this organization? Should this organization come to an end as far as the bishops are concerned? Or can they be reformed? Can they get off the government funding? Can they stop partnering with evil organizations that want to destroy the Africans or whomever else they're dealing with?
And that's the same question. Can they get off government funding and if they stop collaborating with evil organizations? That happens at the same time. If you get off government funding, you're not collaborating with evil organizations.
Okay, let me ask a follow-up question then. So you stated clearly in the press briefing that they chose, it says right here, they chose these partners.
Yes.
CRS rather chose these partners. So if they weren't getting government funding, would they have chosen different partners? Does the government funding require them to choose these partners?
The government funding requires them to choose these partners because the government funding is predicated on participation, sending these girls into sexual and reproductive health programs, which means, by the way, pornographic sex education. Okay, sexual and reproductive health means pornographic sex education with the intent of getting girls on contraception so they won't have children. That's what sexual and reproductive health means, disabling as many reproductive systems as you can of these so they cannot have children. So it's not reproductive health, it's reproductive death.
So can they be reformed?
Would they still, if they weren't compelled by the requirements of the grant to collaborate with these organizations, would they? I would hope they wouldn't. I would hope they wouldn't. Some of the CRS employees, I'm sure, would like to continue to collaborate with these organizations because they aren't faithful Catholics.
So at the end of the day, some bishops will be red-pilled by this.
I agree. Yeah.
But not much will happen even still. Was that how I read you on that?
If we were to match the trend currently, then yes.
God help us all.
Through grace, may we have another outcome.
Yeah. Michael Hichborn, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much.
Joe McLean, iCatholic Radio. So it's on that point, you said the cost of doing business is these federal grants. Let me play the devil's advocate for just 1 second. If CRS were in the room, would they say, but hold on, we're getting money to do great things from a Catholic perspective, and there's just no better options to work with. There's no other organizations on the ground in Africa who will teach abstinence. Every single one all promote contraception, transgenderism, homosexuality, etc. We are just, doing our best, operating in a very broken place. Would they have an argument if they made that case?
No, because there are charitable organizations operating in Africa right now that Michael Hichborn and I are aware of that do good work, including good work in this area. So that objection does not work for CRS. And if you take a kind of position that the good we do outweighs the bad, and therefore on balance you should support our work because we're doing more good than evil, I think that argument fails under its own weight. You cannot, do good. You cannot do evil in the expectation that good will come of it.
Michael, I have been in the room when a bishop has said, I will not read these reports because it's all slander, it's all lies. It's a great organization, CRS, and these people are only out to do harm for the church. How do you break through that? How do we get bishops to actually consider the receipts that you have demonstrated today?
I would actually advise individual Catholics to try and get meetings with their bishops and say, look, Your Excellency, I would like to have a meeting with you to talk about finances. Don't say anything beyond that. and then sit down with our report showing the direct evidence. Okay, this is not hearsay. This is not something that we got from a third or fourth party. These are things that we got directly from CRS. These are interviews and materials that were collected from on-the-ground researchers meeting with CRS officials. So if the bishop is of goodwill, I believe that bishop will be able to look at that material and he will say, this is shocking and I didn't know. But it takes that one-on-one touch.
The African bishops just, called the wild card on fiducia supplicans at the Vatican, saying we can't promote homosexuality there. So wouldn't the African bishops see this and just go into full freakout mode? How is it they would allow this type of behavior from a Catholic organization and all their partners in their dioceses when they are so publicly opposed to homosexuality, perversions of all kinds?
It would be my hope, and I'm pretty sure Steve hopes the same thing, that the African bishops look at our report, examine its contents, and the ones in Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Cameroon actually visit your own Catholic hospitals and look at the materials they're handing out, and then realize that these partnerships that were arranged by Catholic Relief Services are the problem. And if those bishops saw that information and recognized the problem for what it was, I dare say we would see that kind of response where they would get together and say collectively, enough. We don't need your USAID money. And there are good organizations. Steve mentioned that we are aware of good organizations. I want to point out one, Cross Catholic Outreach. Cross Catholic receives relatively similar amounts of funding from pew-sitting Catholics. They get around $200 to $300 million a year from pew-sitting Catholics. They do not take federal funding, and therefore they are not involved in the same kinds of collaborative efforts.
Is this happening only in Africa? The examples in this report that you've given us are African, but do we have evidence or rumors or anything to believe that they're doing the same thing elsewhere?
Yes. Back in 2012 or 2013, I was working with LifeSite News on a couple of investigations, and one of the things that we discovered is that in Cambodia, CRS had put together a document for the Phnom Penh prison in Cambodia for a particular project that they were working on. And in there, it actually gives instruction to a facilitator to say, tell the people participating in this particular discussion on HIV where they can access condoms. So yeah, we know that that's going on over in Asia. We know that CRS had representation on an organization called Medicam. Medicam was a Cambodian-based international aid and development thing specifically for doctors and medical professionals. And they had presentations that were promoting abortion, telling people where they can access abortion and why it's important to maintain the legality of abortion. And CRS was represented on the board of directors of Medicam. So absolutely, this is definitely going on over in Asia as well.
So you talked about name changes, logo changes, things along those lines. You also talked about how these programs have come to an end as recently as 2022, I think, and maybe even last year. So, and then you also said that they kind of morph into a new name, but it's always the same people. So is CRS still actively involved in these programs today, or has their involvement come to an end, but the people who were managing it are still active?
So it's both and. In some situations, CRS will set up the project and it's carried out by somebody else later on, but by creating that root network, they create the infrastructure, and then after that project is over, others come in, take it over, and they start incorporating more strident promotion of contraception and condoms. That we have observed in the past with these particular projects, the continuation project in Cameroon and the continuation project in Lesotho, both involve CRS heavily being involved with the implementation and transition of that project, including the hiring of former CRS personnel into the new project itself. So.